Today's recommended book series is the Vorkosigan Saga by Lois McMaster Bujold. The Vorkosigan Saga is basically for anyone who enjoys a good adventure story. Technically, it's science fiction, but it's really, it's about a guy who's a spy, a mercenary. He has an immense amount of character development over the course of the series, and it's just a lot of fun. So technically, the first book that was published starring Miles Vorkosigan, who is the hero of our series, was called The Warrior's Apprentice. But the story actually began with his mother Cordelia and his dad Arol in Shards of Honor. Now, Shards of Honor is, again, it's science fiction, obviously, but it has elements of fantasy because Arol Vorkosigan's home planet is sort of medieval. And the first two books, which are Shards of Honor and Barayar, are about Cordelia falling in love with Arol when they meet on opposite sides of an interplanetary conflict. And Cordelia is this immensely capable woman who kicks ass. She's a space captain, she's incredibly resourceful, and she's very unlike the women in Barayar, which is where Arol comes from. So the story is that Barayar was isolated for hundreds of years, and then when they did establish contact with the wider universe, they were basically nuked by their biggest rivals. So because of this, they're a little bit suspicious, to say the least, of Outworlders, and they're sort of fearful about the intentions of others, and they have an irrational amount of prejudice against what they call mutants. Now, these are basically babies that were born after the nuclear event and who suffered from radiation poisoning in the womb. This is actually very pertinent to the story because Miles, when he is in his mother's womb, undergoes poisoning due to certain political issues that his father is involved with, and is basically born not disabled, but I would say physically impaired. So he has these really brittle bones that break at a touch, and it takes him about 2 years, the first 2 years of his life, to get to a point where he can even get on his feet. But the thing about Miles is that he is constantly at war. He's constantly fighting against the limitations that fate has sort of imposed upon him. There aren't a lot of lead characters in stories like this where the lead character is also impaired in some way and where that impairment does not go away. So even though Miles gets all his bones replaced by synthetics and he goes through all these surgeries and he eventually ends up having the kind of career that he hopes to have, you can see that his medical history takes a real toll on him. It does impact his life, and that never goes away. He is subject to discrimination, and he is always underestimated by people from his home world. But obviously the people that know him best, the kids that grew up with him, his family, his closest co-workers, his friends, they know him to be extraordinary. But what Miles does so well as a character is show you that it doesn't matter how good you are at the things that you do. When you have a limitation that is imposed upon you that you can't do anything about, sometimes your entire life is a reaction to it, and you can't help it. Miles is manipulative, he's a liar, he does a lot of things that just make you want to smack him, but he's also the underdog, and he's a very enjoyable underdog. Especially to me, because I really enjoy smart characters. I like smart people in real life, and I like them in my literature. And Miles is so smart. The series is also really friendly for LGBTQ characters, and there's a really interesting element to Cordelia and Arol's relationship, which I will let you discover for yourself. And it's also, it starts with, like I said, with Cordelia and Arol before Miles was even born, and then it sort of goes through the paces of Miles becoming an adult and then learning what it means to be himself. And it takes several books for him to become Miles Vorkosigan and to stop trying to run away from himself, because so much about his life and his persona on Barayar is so painful to him emotionally. I mean, this is a kid whose grandfather tried to drown him or like have him murdered basically. And that kind of societal rejection is not completely papered over by the fact that you have loving parents at home who will literally go to bat over you. His mom like beheads an emperor for him. It's badass. I love Cordelia. It's also not incredibly explicit or anything, so I think it would be suited to a young adult audience as well. So if you are not into science fiction but you have a young person at home whom you think would be into it, then perhaps you could recommend it to them. In terms of character development and in terms of representation and in terms of non-normative relationships between people, and just a ripping good yarn, I think the Vorkosigan Saga is pretty much in its own league. I love Lois McMaster Bujold. I think she's a literary genius, not just for genre writing, but just in terms of the story and the development of her characters and the situations that she puts them into and the way she gets them out of those. It's not what you would expect, while being entirely fun and I would use the word wholesome for a lot of it. It's very progressive. I really enjoy it. And then once you finish the Vorkosigan Saga, you could try reading one of her fantasy series. I highly recommend the novellas that she has called Penric and the Demon. I wrote about it on my Instagram, and you should check out my Insta page if you want more suggestions like those. For more videos, please hit the subscribe button.